Hello, everyone. Welcome again to episode 5, the very last one of our 2020 Rogers Park Westridge Historic House Walk. I'm Donna Vitale, and I'm your host again today. I want to thank everybody for being with us for this traditional Rogers Park event adapted to this crazy year. I also want to thank you all for the support you've shown for the organization. Remember, you can always support us by going to our website to donate, to become a member, to renew your membership, to buy our books, or to buy a property history quest report on your own home, or just to see what's coming up on the calendar. We do have some new events that we're going to be announcing fairly soon, hopefully this week. And so you can go there and see details on the website or check your email because some of those will be coming out pretty soon. Want to say thanks again to the volunteers on our Property History Quest team for all the work that they've done on this project. Stephanie Bartow and I did most of the research for today's home, and then we turned it over to Barb Weaver, who found the story of Park Gables in her report. And I think she's with us today. She's supposed to be, but I don't see her immediately, but that's okay. Hi, Barb. Thank you. We can always use more help. So if you're intrigued by the idea of doing historic research and writing, fill out the website volunteer form and we'll be in touch with details of what's involved. No experience needed, but it helps to be comfortable with doing research on the internet. So that's just something to think about. Kind of met the team that's working to make this tour. Erin McNeil is our events coordinator. She's been Zooming on this tour and will continue to do so. Erin, unmute yourself for a minute and say hello so people know your face.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin. I'm here on the Historical Society account today. So that's where I am. If you have any questions today about any sort of tech issues that you're having or anything like that, feel free to message me directly. And for those of you that I've met, great to see you again. And for those of you that I haven't, I'm looking forward to when I can meet you all in person soon. So enjoy the presentation.
And Sarah Fiola, who is our homeowner coordinator and videographer. Oh, excuse me. Today, you'll be seeing another one of her really fun videos, which was even more complicated than usual because she included 3 sets of Park Gables residents, not just one. So Sarah, say hello. You've finally going to have a relaxing week when you're not dealing with editing and videos for a while.
Hi, everybody. I'm also handling the chat. So while Donna is doing the presentation, we're not going to stop her and ask questions. If you have a question along the way, go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll keep track of it and we'll ask her all the questions that come in at once at the end of the program after we see the video. So thank you, Donna.
Sure. Thank you. And about those Park Gables residents in our video, the project was commissioned by Tim Harrington on behalf of the Park Gables Co-op Board. And Tim told us that they wanted something to introduce the history of Park Gables to current and prospective owners. And I hope we've achieved that goal for you. Tim and his partner, Loretta Line, will be our hosts. I see they're on, so hi. And then we'll get an inside tour of an apartment by Robin Roy, who's also on. Sorry, that's my phone. And a tour of the outdoor community gardens by Earl Mineski and Kate Donlin, who are also on. So thank you all for joining us. And you'll meet them all in the video and then maybe in the question period if we have questions for them. So thank you all for helping make this a very special tour to end our house walk for this year. I'm gonna get started again. I gotta share the screen again. So let's do that. And as we go along, as Sarah said, just put questions in the chat. to start out, we need to get a little oriented. So let's start a quick review of West Ridge development. I think we all know in 1843, Philip Rogers made a land purchase here from the US government. And that very first purchase was a large parcel of land in West Ridge that includes what is now the site of Park Gables. In fact, it's believed that Rogers' original homestead was somewhere in the vicinity of the intersection of Lunt and Western, which would be right here. But of course, there were no streets then, so we don't know exactly where the house was located. But there's a marker in Indian Boundary Park that commemorates that site. Of course, it wasn't called Indian Boundary Park or Rogers Park for that matter. At that time, this whole area was called Ridgeville, or simply people referred to it as being up the ridge, which was right along here, marked today by Ridge Boulevard. And the whole community of West Ridge gets its name because it was west of the ridge. That became a village in 1890. So Rogers died in 1856, but farming in Ridgeville continued for another 50 years or so, pretty much as it was when he was alive. Many of the farmers held on to their land while to the east of the ridge, Rogers Park was developing as a residential area. They built greenhouses in a lot of the area. They were, you look at an early map and there were greenhouses all over the place, and inside they looked like this. It's a photograph from the time. They allowed the farmers to continue growing crops all year long, and they grew cucumbers and beans and vegetables like that, as well as flowers, which they sold at Chicago markets, which were 10 miles away. Things finally started to change in West Ridge between 1910 and 1920. In 1911, the Edgewater Golf Club, which had been on Broadway, which was also rapidly developing at that time, they announced plans to move to a new golf course on Pratt between Ridge and Western. This is now today Warren Park, and there is still a 9-hole golf course that's part of Warren Park that was originally the Edgewater Golf Club land. So they were moving sort of out to the less developed area where they could get land for a beautiful golf course pretty inexpensively. And at the same time, a little bit later, the streetcar was extended from Devon Avenue, which is way down here at the bottom of the map, off the map, all the way up to Howard Street, which is off the map, along Western Avenue was extended. Before that, this area had had no public transportation whatsoever. So the coming of the streetcar made it a little easier to get here, even though there really wasn't anything but greenhouses here to come and visit at that time. There was, however, the new Indian Boundary Park, which was also laid out in 1916 and was pretty much developed in the next couple of years as a beautiful park. It was originally a state park. And it spurred further development in the neighborhood, along with the streetcar, of course. That included the whole cooperative apartment complex that we're talking about. This is actually, I labeled it 1928, but it actually was, this photograph was actually more like 1930. But Park Gables was built in 1928, and it's here. And these are the other buildings known as the Indian Boundary Co-ops. We'll talk about them in more detail, of course, later. That development, as you can see, by then was also starting to creep to the south, and this is all pretty much single-family homes. We estimate that between 1920 and 1930, there were at least 500 new homes built south of Indian Boundary Park to Devon between California and Western. So this area kind of sprung up overnight from being pretty empty, deserted farmland to this community that's pretty close to what we know it as today. This is what Park Gables looks like today, or at least a little tiny piece of it. I took this photograph, and it's actually from about here in the park, looking straight at this wing of the building. It's virtually impossible to get the whole building in without some pretty fancy photographic equipment. So that just gives you a little view of what you would see if you go to Indian Boundary and look at Park Gables today. The developers of Park Gables were men called Gubbins, McDonnell, and Blietz. The developers, Earl Gubbins and Alan McDonnell, had a thriving real estate business in Rogers Park in the teens and 20s. And they began to see the business opportunities in co-ops around 1924. They built their first co-op at 1327 West Lunt, which is just east of Sheridan Road. And this building is still there, and it's kind of similar in the same general style idea as Park Gables, with lots of different entrances, 3 stories tall, courtyard in between, beautiful landscaping, and I'm happy to see that it still looks like it's in pretty good condition. At the same time, Gubbins and McDonnell were putting up single-family houses in West Ridge. All of those 500, they didn't build all of them, but they built a substantial number of those, including their own family homes that were on Coyle, the 2400 block of Coyle, just west of Western. Coyle's the first block south of Indian Boundary Park. So they were right there in the new neighborhood and lived there for many years. The first Gubbins and McDonnell building, well, no, I had to stop and talk about Irvin Blietz. Shortly after they built their homes and started working in co-ops, they partnered with Irvin Blietz. He was a younger man than they, and this was his first major project. He'd done a little bit of 2 flats and things like that, but he'd never worked at this scale before. So he was the new partner in the Indian Boundary project, which was built here. These are the earlier buildings, the first ones built in 1925 to 1927. And then this is Park Gables. This is the same picture we had on the last slide, but I wanted to show it again so that you can see kind of what Park Gables looks like in its totality. It's an E-shaped building. It's all one building. There's lots of different entrances, and there's actually front entrances and back entrances that go all the way around the building. And then with courtyards and gardens in between. And then this area is the community garden that we'll be taking a tour of. And of course, this is Indian Boundary Park as it looked in whenever this picture was taken. It's quite changed now. There's a big pond and it's really quite lovely. If you've never been there, you really should try to get there. So 1924, until the 20s, cooperative apartment ownership was a new idea in Chicago, although there were lots of co-ops already being built in New York City and elsewhere. They'd been in operation since probably the 1890s or so. But it was a change in Illinois law in 1924 that made co-ops more widely available. And then you started seeing co-op apartment buildings appearing in all of Chicago's more elite neighborhoods, lots of them in Hyde Park and Kenwood and Lakeview and the Gold Coast and in Rogers Park. Buyers being unfamiliar with co-op ownership was an issue in marketing these buildings. So the developers ran ads trying to make prospective buyers comfortable with the concept of owning rather than renting an apartment home, or I should say in the case of co-ops, owning a share in the entire building that then entitled you to an apartment. These are the ads, some of the ads that Gubbins, McDonnell, and Blietz ran. They all sell the advantages of co-op ownership, and they describe how popular co-ops already are in New York City, which, since Chicago was the second city, that sounds to me like that was an attempt to be kind of the gold standard of the time. The technique that they used is called the advertorial, and we still see that in advertising today. So I want to take a minute to show you what they've done. This ad is not a newspaper page with an ad at the bottom. The whole thing is an advertorial. It's labeled that way up here at the top in teeny tiny print. Even if you see the whole full page of the ad, it's a little hard to see. It has a byline by somebody who was presumably a reporter, Harry A. Rick. He's not a reporter that I ever saw a byline for in the newspaper. He probably was, if he's a real person at all, he probably was an employee either of Gubbins, McDonnell, and Blietz, or of their public relations advertising company. The ad has this sort of newspaper article-like thing that's an announcement: state park to be bounded by fine co-op buildings, which is kind of not exactly breaking news, since by the time this ad ran, 3 of the buildings were already built and occupied. 2 of them were occupied. It has a little inquiring reporter feature, which was a common feature in the newspapers at that time. They ask a question and then just get a man on the street interview from somebody to answer it just off the cuff. This question, of course, is owning a cooperative apartment that's well financed and well managed a sound investment as a way to get a luxury apartment rather than renting? And of course, the person who answered, the vice president of Chicago Trust Company, so he certainly ought to know, says yes, a sound investment. It's a wonderful opportunity to have a luxury apartment, and I recommend that everybody should buy a co-op. The part of this ad that actually looks like an ad down here is an ad for Park Castle, which was, as I said, the 3rd building to be built. So 2 of them were already built when they were just announcing that Park Castle was available. So watch out for those. You still see advertorials in magazines, if anybody's actually reading print magazines these days, and occasionally in the newspaper. So 1927, Park Gables was announced, and we found the building permit for that. It tells us that Gubbins, McDonnell, and Blietz were the owners, the developers. It tells us that the architect was someone named J.F. Denson. We'll talk about him in a minute. And it tells us that the construction cost for the building was estimated to be $850,000. I don't know what the final cost was. There was a tendency to underestimate on these building permits because you got charged for the permit based on a percentage of the amount of the value of the construction. Once they got the permit in January of 1927, the project was announced about a month later. This drawing from the Tribune is really beautiful. I wish we could find the original of it. It's a lovely architectural drawing. It has one little mistake in it. It has a car parked on this road, which actually never existed. There's still not a road separating Park Gables from the Indian Boundary Park. This section of Estes, even though the addresses are all on Estes, is not a road. It doesn't exist. This announcement, though, talked about the co-op at Indian Boundary Park that resembles an exclusive club. It was described as one of the city's greatest cooperative apartment building developments with all sorts of features, many of the sort only found in clubs. It's like they reprinted the press release from the developers. But they included luxuries that are important and still available in the development today, including a landscape courtyards with formal English gardens, men's and women's gymnasiums, with the women's gym featuring, quote, equipment to help along the well-known pastime of reduction. So anybody that wants to go on a diet, they've got it there at Park Gables. There were handball courts and an indoor putting green, a large and attractive swimming pool, which you'll see in the video tour. And this is my favorite, a nursery for children. And again, I'm quoting, presided over by a gracious elderly woman, where parents may leave their future presidents and presidents' wives while they step forth of an evening. So you not only got a pool and a putting green, you got a babysitter if you bought a share of this development. Architect James Fletcher Denson, just a moment on his work. For a long time, he wasn't even identified as the architect of Park Gables. There's a lot of confusion about who the architect was, and you'll see that in some of the older documents that you see about Park Gables. But in recent years, it's become very clear that he did design this building, and we saw it in the building permit. There never was really any question, but people were just getting their information wrong. James Denson was born at the end of the Civil War in Virginia. He was the son of a Confederate soldier. His father died when he was 5 years old, and his mother remarried to a man who was a Washington, D.C. architect working for the U.S. Government. James followed in the footsteps of his stepfather and became an architect, set up his first architectural practice in Washington. One of the commissions he did there was the law school for Georgetown University. So if anybody went to that school or knows somebody from there, James Denson designed the building. He then moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, where he did a number of noted buildings, including this one in the Lower Town Historic District in St. Paul. It's a business district right by the river, and it's on the National Historic Register of Historic Places. From St. Paul, Denson moved to Chicago, where he lived for about 10 years until he died. He lived in our neighborhood. First, he was at 5811 North Ridge in Edgewater, and then he moved to 2039 West Jarvis in Rogers Park, sort of between Clark and Ridge. So he was a little bit east of the ridge. He was here, as I said, for about 10 years. He designed commercial buildings and private homes. These are some examples. Most of them were in the revivalist style, which was popular at that time. They would take an older style of architecture and kind of adapt it. So here we have kind of a Swiss chalet, and this one is from some other time period, and this one has the little almost Renaissance-y looking arches at the top of all things, the headquarters for Chicago Plumbers. One of his last projects was the Indian Boundary Park buildings, the co-ops. In fact, he died in 1927 while Park Gables was still under construction. So here's a better view of the other ones around the corner. Park Gables would be like around the corner over here, but this is Park Castle, Park Manor, Park Crest. Quite lovely. And this is a photo from our archives. So when we started this project, the materials we got from Clark Gables said that included claims that the building had won an architectural award in 1928, but it never said who the award was from or what it was called or anything like that. So we started digging. We did not find an architectural award, But what we did find was this. While Park Gables was under construction, the National Association of Real Estate Boards launched a program to set standards for cooperative apartments, kind of like today's LEED standards, where they see how a building is in terms of environmental issues. But this one was probably to counter some of the reluctance to buy into these developments that we saw ads addressing earlier. For the record, I have to note that all three of these partners, Gubbins, McDonnell, and Blietz, were very active in this organization, and they all had a role in developing these standards. But in true Chicago fashion, in 1928, Park Gables became the first cooperative apartment development in the nation to be certified under this program. And this article actually is from the Boston newspaper, talking about the establishment of standards and that the first certificate was awarded to Park Gables. So this was a big deal at the time. Park Gables also was used to set standards in other ways. Several of the companies that were involved in supplying materials for the project ran ads about the use of their products in this fine building. For example, here's one from 1931. The Flint Faience Tile Company bragged about its tiles being used in the swimming pool. The ad ran in regular publications in 1931, but it was later featured in a book about luxury apartments of the era, and that's where we got these photographs and the photographs of the tiles, which again, watch for them when you see the video. You'll see these very tiles in the video. Here's another, this one is from the First Trust and Savings Bank, the firm that provided financing for the property. It's talking about the $550,000 mortgage that they held on the building. That mortgage was something to brag about in the 1920s when this ad ran and the 20s were still roaring. But when the Depression hit, the mortgage really became a problem, and the Park Gables Cooperative Apartments just about fell apart. And in fact, many residents had a lot of trouble paying their shareholder fees. Gradually, almost all the apartments had to be taken over by the association and rented out. Sometimes they were rented back to the original residents and sometimes to other people. So how did they get those original residents in the first place? Let's take a look at some of the early ads. These ads ran through the construction period and up to the time when Park Gables was completed and people were just starting to move in. They all recite the luxury features of the building, and they talk about the soundness of the project, which by the time of Park Gables, there were already about 150 occupied apartments in the other buildings. So they stressed that this was not a new thing that you were taking a risk on. It was a solid, established proposition. The ads also stress the exclusive nature of a co-op, so exclusive living facilities at a price you can afford. The thing about a co-op is not just anybody's allowed to become a shareholder. There is a selection process. These ads talked about offering homes for only, quote, the finest families, the sort of people you will like for permanent neighbors. One of those exclusive neighbors was Irvin Blietz himself. He and his family were the largest original shareholders, taking a penthouse apartment where they lived for several years. And then in about 1937 or 38, the Blietzes moved to Wilmette. And from then on, Irvin spent his career building suburban developments, mostly single family homes with a colonial American theme. There was a Connecticut village, I think was one of his first, a Lexington village, a Concord village, you kind of get the idea. He lived and worked on the North Shore until he died in 1968, and his son continued operating the firm for many years after that. Now, something about that theme of exclusivity, there's a dark side to it. And for a while in the history of Park Gables, it really crossed over into open prejudice and discrimination, which is an important part of 20th century history in Chicago and America, not just for this building. So I really want to talk about that for a minute. You've probably heard the term restrictive covenants or the term redlining, especially lately when people are starting to discuss examples of structural or institutional racism. This is one of the things they're referring to. Restrictive covenants were common in the first half of the 20th century. Simply put, they were clauses inserted into property deeds that were binding the property owner and all future owners to restrictions when they sold, leased, or occupied the property. In Chicago, most of the restrictive covenants prevented sales to either people of color or to Jews. In other parts of the country, there were other restrictions. In the West, for instance, there were restrictions not allowing Mexicans or Native Americans or Chinese. And in many places, there was prejudice, if not formal outright restriction, against Catholics or against people from Southern or Eastern Europe, all in the guise of keeping up the property values by excluding undesirable neighbors. In fact, in 1924, the National Association of Realtors, which still exists today, added a point to its code of ethics, which reads, quote, "A realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood members of any race or nationality or any individuals whose presence will clearly be detrimental to the property values in that neighborhood." And textbooks on property appraisal taught that, quote, "We must recognize the customs, habits, and characteristics of various strata of society and races of people," unquote, when determining property values. By 1935, this outlook was US government policy as enforced by the new Federal Housing Administration, a New Deal agency that was trying to maintain property values during the Depression. One of the FHA entities, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, developed maps rating neighborhoods all over the country in terms of their investment quality, kind of like Moody's and places like that rate bonds these days. The ratings were based, at least in part, but in a large part, on the kinds of people who lived in the neighborhood. The best neighborhoods were the green ones on this map, and the places where investment was considered hazardous were red. That's where we get the term redlining, drawing a red line around undesirable neighborhoods. And it was a problem because in red or even in yellow neighborhoods, potential and current homeowners had difficulty getting mortgages and insurance. And the result was a decline in property values that became almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is just a portion of the map of Chicago from that period. You can see an awful lot of Chicago was yellow or red with very few greens and some blues scattered in here and there. In 1948, restrictive covenants were declared unenforceable by the Supreme Court, but they were not actually against the law until the Fair Housing Act of 1964. Redlining remained a problem even much longer, up through the 70s. I can remember people talking about redlining in Rogers Park, and probably still goes on today in some form or another, less overtly, but I'll bet there's some maps somewhere that have lines around certain neighborhoods. So in the 20s and 30s, when Park Gable was being sold and rented, these practices were reflected. They reflected those ideas like most of the other real estate in Chicago at the time. This ad, which is from 1929, after the building was already open, is similar to the ones we saw earlier in that it emphasizes the building's features. It talks about exclusivity, but not outright discrimination, although the language has changed a little bit. It now talks about careful restrictions, assuring neighborhood tenant owners of desirable type. Doesn't tell you what that desirable type would be defined as. Some places were much more direct, such as this ad we found for the Edgewater Athletic Club, which was located at 1205 Sherwin, the condominium building now called Sherwin on the Lake, right at the Lake Michigan shore. This ad stated that the apartments were designed and furnished for people of discriminating taste. And then it goes on to define what that means, which is Gentiles. In 1937, Park Gables was running this kind of ad with Gentiles only references. So we wanted to put it in context and see how widespread this practice really was. We did a search in the newspapers for ads that use that terminology, either Gentiles or Gentiles only or restricted, those versions of signaling that were existing in ad state. We found literally thousands of classified ads. And they weren't just for rental apartments, they were for homes for sale, they were for employment, both for household help and for regular other outside the workplace employment. And there were ads for private clubs that advertised or claimed that they were for Gentiles only. This is just an example. We took one day in the Chicago Tribune, April 13th, 1938, and looked only at the north side apartments for rent ads. And you can hardly see them on the screen because this is such a difficult scan. But all these little pink highlights are the places where the words restricted or Gentiles only appeared in the ad. And we pulled some of these addresses just so you can see. They were all over. This is Lakeshore Drive, Uptown, Rogers Park, Westridge, every place. Here's Park Gables, which is why we picked this particular day. There was a Park Gables ad running that day. But they were very, very common at the time. And even as late as the late 40s and 50s, this is a restrictive covenant we found from an urban Blietz apartment development that was started in 1948, and then he added on to it in 1955. I'm not sure exactly which phase of the project included these clauses, but the clause was that any lot in the area could not be sold to any person who is not a Caucasian, nor could it be leased or occupied or anything else, excepting, however, persons employed as servants by Caucasians residing on the premises. So that's an example of the kind of restrictive covenants that are in the news yet again today. Speaking of today, I am happy to report that today Park Gables and the rest of Westridge and Rogers Park are no longer these kind of exclusive neighborhoods. In fact, we celebrate our inclusion and diversity, often by quoting some version of the statistics on a chart that I'm going to show you in a minute. If you saw episode 4 last week, you may remember that Liz Weck referred to this kind of statistic in her video tour. It's about the number of languages that are spoken in our community. This is a finding from the US Census Bureau. indicating answers to a question they asked, which was, if English is not the primary language spoken in the home, what other language do the occupants speak? And West Ridge, of all the community areas in the city, had the largest number of different languages named in response to that question. As you can see, Spanish, as we might expect, is the largest, highest proportion. About a third of non-English speaking West Ridge residents speak Spanish in the home. But look at the rest. It goes from Urdu, Arabic, Serbo-Croatian, Vietnamese, that's every continent now that we've got, all the way around, Chinese, Hindi, African languages, Yiddish, Hebrew, Hungarian, Armenian, I mean, just anything you could think of, which is one of the reasons that we named our community cookbook The World in One Neighborhood, and refer to our community as the World in One Neighborhood. Shameless plug, you can buy this cookbook on our website or at Clark Devon Hardware, but I really wanted to point it out that it is a way of celebrating the cultural richness that makes our community such a very special place today. And speaking of special places, let's take a tour of Park Gables. So let's get going here.
My name is Tim Harrington. We've lived here since 2010, so we've lived here 10 years. And I hold the volunteer position of, I'm the last board member, I'm the newest board member, and I'm also doing a lot of work in and around the history of the building.
Yeah, well, and my name's Loretta Line, and Tim and I moved in here, I think, in January. It was like really cold. Well, I'll tell you what I really love about Park Gables is so much, but the pool is what sold me. We came over to look at this place, and our realtor said, "Come on, I want to show you this." And we walked into this pool, and it was as if we were like walking into the Great Gatsby or something. You know, it was pretty impressive.
The swimming pool is what they call a Pompeian-style swimming pool, probably because it's got tiled walls up to about 5 feet, a tiled floor. Obviously, the swimming pool is made of tile, but it also has, I don't know how many, more than a dozen Corinthian columns surrounding the pool. And it has this beautiful fabric striped ceiling. So it just envelops you when you walk in there.
If you take a look at some of the tiles there, they are in a very Italian movement of waves, and the tops of the Corinthian columns are like leaves on stalks of wheat or whatever it is. It's just lovely. So I know that you guys are going to meet Earl and Katie. They're going to talk about the garden, and that's going to be pretty exciting. And then you're going to see inside of Robin Roy's apartment, and I'll tell you, it's beautiful. So please enjoy yourselves. See you later.
Bye-bye. See you later.
Hi, welcome to my home in the beautiful Park Gables building. My name's Robin. I've lived here for a little over 2 years, and I'm happy to show you my home. Right now we're in the foyer, which is really kind of one of my favorite rooms in the house. I have my bar here, which you'll see later. When this whole pandemic hit, I was able to turn this into my office. I'm able to do my Zoom calls, my exercise. This is really a multi-purpose room, which I enjoy a lot. When I bought this apartment, this whole area was empty. There were just a few bookshelves in it, and I thought, what a great place to have a bar. So I had this designed. I put in the cupboard down here, and I got the antique mirrors and glass. So I must say this is a great spot that I use when I'm entertaining. I think that's one of the things that I really like about these apartments is they're very spacious and gracious. And I've always been drawn to homes from the 1920s. I think they built things very well, and I like the design style. And this apartment, although I'm not going to show you because I've stashed lots of things in them, has lots of closet space. The only thing I changed was the location of the kitchen door. When I bought the apartment, this foyer area had no door except for into the hallway to the dining room and the bedrooms. And it was very dark, so I thought a great thing to do would be to switch the kitchen door so that it opened up into the foyer so that we get the light from the kitchen, and it also makes the kitchen a true galley kitchen without any of those awkward, useless corners. On the floor plan, which I was provided by Park Gables, this, which I would call a hallway, is called the gallery. So we'll go through the gallery into the dining room.
How do you think this room has changed since you moved the door?
I think it really hasn't, well, it gives me more space for my art, which I like. And I didn't really like the door into the kitchen because then if I'm entertaining, I don't like to see the messy kitchen, so that's good. And it really feels like you're somewhere else. I know a lot of people now like open concept, but I like spaciousness, and I think this is very spacious while being cozy. And I kind of like the delineation between rooms, so I think this is a really nice dining room. I enjoy it. It's one of the other things I really liked about this apartment was that the living space and the sleeping space was separated. So there's this door that we're going to go through, and the bedrooms and the bathroom are back here. And you'll see there's the original linen closet, which I also had stripped, so it really kind of looks like a piece of furniture, which I think is nice. I had the tub reglazed and the little soap holders and stuff redone. But otherwise, it's all the original bathroom, and I just love it. I mean, the detail on the floor and the tiles, I think it's great. It's a little bit small by modern standards, but I'm just one person, so how much space do I need? One of the biggest projects I did was remodeling the kitchen. It was a 1950s metal kitchen when I bought the apartment, so the appliances didn't work. It just wasn't my taste, so I gutted it all. I already talked about moving the doorway. So this is the kitchen, and I'd just like to point out one interesting thing. You'll see this Sputnik chandelier, which are actually very popular right now, but this was the only fixture that I kept. Originally it was in the foyer. So this is the living room. Again, another spacious room, which I like. I think I mentioned before, I like the older buildings. And it seems to me that now when they do rehabs, they take out the things that I like. So, I just like the old stuff. And I like to preserve that architecture. So I'm happy to be able to do that. And I think one of my favorite things is the view over the park. This building sits right on the park. Although the address is Estes does not go through, so you have a view right up through our front courtyard onto the park, which is really quite lovely.
Can you give us a history and an overview of the Circle Garden?
The Circle Gardens have been here since the building was built. And I think for many years, the shareholders just put annuals in those Circle Gardens, and to various degrees of success. And a few years ago, some of the shareholders decided it would be nice to make that a perennial garden. And so they worked with a landscape architect to design the garden with plants that are, from Illinois and would grow well here and thrive and provide some interest for all 4 seasons.
My name is Katie Donlan, and I have been here at Park Gables for 5.5 years. And my position on the garden is basically I'm just a gardener. And now it's your turn.
My name's Earl Mineski. I've been here 5.5 years. We are married, and I am currently the garden coordinator.
I have a gardening philosophy, and my gardening philosophy is do no harm to the soil, to the insects, the birds, the bees, the butterflies. So we don't use any chemicals. We just use natural, we use leaves for mulch, we use straw, we're using our compost that we now make here. And I encourage every insect on earth. And now we have, we have had hummingbirds and butterflies. We've had all that, but that's my goal, is to keep those healthy.
How long has the garden been here? Well, we have inherited a garden from a shareholder whose grandmother originally had the garden. And she had told us that there was a holly shrub in our garden that was at least 40 years old. So possibly the garden has grown since that inception. We have no idea.
The garden is for all the shareholders. It's a quiet place. It's so even if you don't have a gardener, you can come out and put your chair out here and sit there and watch the birds.
Can you explain what compost is, and can we see the compost pile?
I think that's a great idea. Let's go see the compost pile. People that are signed up to do this put in their kitchen scraps, basically anything that's a vegetable or basically vegetables, and they come down here and they throw it in this one side, and then they also put in shredded newspaper, shredded office paper, and we have sawdust now. Clean sawdust that we got from a furniture person on Lunt Avenue, right on the garden. See that? It's just gorgeous.
That's beautiful.
And it only took 5 weeks. Normally, if you just layer your compost, it could take up to a year to break down. But since
That
you
is
turn
so
it, show how you turn it.
Okay.
This is what makes it break down so
So the
fast.
compost is in there, so people put the compost in, then they put the carbon in, and you just give it a
It's leaking.
turn.
So
And
that
that-
helps it break down.
That's why it's so fast. That's why we get, so we can keep using it.
So we're going to take a walk down over here. A beautiful hydrangea spot over here. You're going to walk through here. So this is the perennial side over here. This garden here has a lot of tomatoes up here, as you see, and they are coming ripening, and they have some flowers here that protect it from bugs. Behind us we have a smaller garden right over here, which she grows grapes and also some perennials. We could come over here, and here's a vegetable garden.
The key thing here is this bed spring. He found this in the alley, so it could be used as for his climbers.
Yeah, so he had squashes climbing up there. So here's more.
This is my favorite part because this has got all the pollinators, the flowers.
These are pollinators.
And
This
they're
actually
native
is our
flowers.
garden.
So
This is a garden that is a huge perennial garden with annuals in here that is just wonderful. there's a small perennial garden over here. And there's a vegetable garden here.
Yeah, there's a grasshopper. Get him. Oh, goody. Where is it? Right there. We're talking about. Now, are those good bugs or not really?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
One of our many
Oh, he's so pretty.
creatures that habitate our garden.
Besides us.
Right.
That was fabulous. So thank you all for doing that wonderful tour of the building. Sarah, do we have questions, comments?
Yes, we do. Somebody said, does Ridgeville extend into Evanston? And is it still named there?
It's known, yes, Ridgeville actually started or extends all the way from really south in Edgewater around Rose Hill Cemetery was designated as being in Ridgeville, was part of Ridgeville. And then it goes all the way up to the Evanston North city limits. You hear about people who lived on the ridge. It was originally, there was a township that was then broken up into different townships. The original township was called Ridgeville, going back way to the 1840s or 50s, around then. So yes, you will hear people in Evanston talking about the Ridge and Ridgeville as well. Of course, Ridge Boulevard goes up there.
Where on Broadway was the Edgewater Golf Club?
Oh, you had to ask me that. I think it was around a little south of Bryn Mawr, something like that. It was not a huge, there were two other places where it was located before it moved to Rogers Park. And I think the second one was around 55 or 5600 on what was then Broadway, but don't hold me to that. I've seen where it was, but I don't really remember.
Was there some exclusivity to the golf club as well?
Absolutely. It was totally restricted. No Catholics, no Jews, no African Americans was like without saying. But yes, it was a definitely a restricted club, as were the other, there was another
Yeah, we can do everything.
country club in our area, and that was also restricted. Yeah.
Could you tell me how much were the shares originally when it began?
It depended on the size of the apartment.
Okay.
And I think that the smallest apartments, which were 4 rooms, were about I remember seeing this on the census, about $4,000, and then the larger ones were 7 or 8. I do believe Erwin Blietz's apartment was $12,000. I don't know if I've got that exactly right, but they were in that range. They were comparable to the prices for homes being sold. A lot of the homes that I talked about going up south of the park were originally $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in that range.
In the 20s.
In the 20s, yes.
Yes. And
Yeah.
when at the crash, 1932, after that, was their different price? It was a different price. Correct?
Well, then they weren't owned anymore. People lost their ownership shares. So they were being rented. And in the 1940 census, we know what the rents were. I think for the larger apartments, they were $75 a month, something like that. Again, comparable to the rest of the area.
Yeah. Thank you.
So here's a question about, do you know when there was a zoo installed in Indian Boundary Park and when it was uninstalled?
It was uninstalled only fairly recently, probably 6 or 7 years ago now. I don't know when it first appeared. If anybody else is on the call that does know that, chime in.
Yeah, I can tell you the zoo was first opened in about the mid 1920s and ran for almost 90 years and ended up more of a farm than a zoo. And no, go ahead. It's fine.
I was just going to ask, I remember when they closed the zoo, but I don't remember exactly when that was. You know the date, Tim?
About 5 years ago, I think.
They closed the zoo in 2013.
Okay.
And then they developed the children's play area, which is really a terrific use of the space.
Yeah, it's a nature center kind of thing.
Yeah.
And of course, in 2014, the field house at Indian Boundary burned.
Yeah.
But then it was beautifully restored. That's a historic building as well. That was built in, I think, 1929, something like that, short after Park Gables.
And the architect that works for the Park District for the city actually lives in our building, and he helped deal with the restoration of the Indian Boundary Park Center.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that was a project that won all kinds of awards, and it's really.
Oh yeah.
Again, if people haven't been there, you really should make a point to get there.
Where do you park?
On the street.
On the street.
No, there are parking lot. There are parking spaces. We have a parking lot, but
not for the
but not. Oh, you mean for the park?
I thought that's what the question was on the, where do you park if you go to the park?
For Park Gables, Park
Gables. Oh,
yeah.
Loretta answered. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are many parking spaces that are available for rent for residents. However, there are not as many as there are residents.
Right.
So you have to like get in line.
What is there? There are stairs going up. There's no elevator in these buildings.
No elevator.
Right.
And we live on the first floor, so we're happy about that.
Yeah.
But but I have to say that when we don't have a parking spot, but I have never had to park off of my block.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And we live on the east side of the building, and the parking lot is on the west side of the building.
Okay.
So even if we had a parking space, we'd probably be parking over on the east side. Anyway.
We're parking closer than we would if we had a parking space.
Right.
It's a really dense area. It's really quite lovely,
Anna, you may know the answer to this question since the Historical Society does work like this, but is there a way to find the original apartment layouts for the building or for the apartments, not the whole building, but individual apartments?
I think Tim has floor plans, don't you? You gave me
we have floor plans that delineate the extent of each apartment in the building. And those, I think the original floor plans date from 1928, so they're fairly not current, but I don't imagine there's been a whole lot of change.
Right, and then how likely would that nook that Robin showed, would that really be for a telephone, or is that on the floor plans?
It may be in the floor plans. We don't have a nook, so, but.
Every apartment is very different, and that's the interesting piece. We don't have a nook, but a lot of people do.
Tim and Loretta, do you know where the children's nursery was?
No, we have no idea.
No, I wish we had one now. I was
thinking that would be on the floor plans.
That would be great to have that. We'd get a lot of new buyers, I think.
Yeah. But you'd have to find an elderly lady to take care of the kids.
Yeah, I'll do it.
I have a question about the layouts and square footage. You mentioned that every apartment is kind of different. Presumably they're similar in tiers. Oh, by the way, hi, Katie and Earl.
Who's that?
So my question is, as an example, what is the square footage of Robin's apartment that we saw, beautifully done? And is that typical?
Where is it?
Right there.
I think the apartments, I think the one bedrooms are about 1,000 square feet, and then the two bedrooms between 12 and 1,500 square feet, and the three bedrooms about 2,000 square feet. So like Loretta said, they're all different, but they're all very spacious.
Yeah.
Very gracious layouts. Thank you.
Donna, somebody has a question that wants an explanation for the name of Indian Boundary Park.
Oh.
Okay, Indian Boundary Park marks the Indian boundary line, which was Rogers Avenue rather. In the early days, 1816, the Indian boundary was the line that divided the area between the territory controlled by the Indians that was north of the Indian boundary line and a 20-mile swath of territory that was kind of granted as a right-of-way for settlers from the east to come through the Great Lakes and get to the Mississippi River as westward expansion was going on. That was by a treaty between the US government and three of the Indian communities, the Indian tribes. That Indian boundary line was soon kind of abolished. And by 1833, the Indians all ceded all the property, and then that's when the government started selling it off to developers or purchasers like Philip Rogers and other people, farmers and settlers.
Yeah, and that was a death march actually that happened for Indians in Illinois, not just here, but south of here too, to Iowa.
Iowa, Kansas, it was the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the, now I'm forgetting the third. And they either went north to Wisconsin, or some of them were resettled to the Kansas territory, which was Iowa and places west. But they were forced out. It was after the Black Hawk War, 1832. Not a very good part of our history, but it's history. I want to add just one more thing. When we were talking about where the nursery was. There was an air raid shelter that was set up in Park Gables during World War II, just in case we were bombed. I don't know why they thought they would be bombed in Chicago, but I guess being prepared is the best prevention. And I don't think it was ever used, but it was set up as an air raid shelter with cots and places for people to go as a refuge. You ever use it as a tornado shelter? I don't know, that might be more valuable these days.
So, and then somebody wants to know how we managed to not have a street in front. How come Estes stops just for our building?
Community activism, I think probably spurred on by Gubbins, McDonnell, and Blietz, who organized the owners to do a petition. They went to public meetings, and that was when Estes didn't exist, and then they were going to extend Estes west from Western to where it had started up again earlier at about Washtenaw, and the city wanted to connect those two pieces of Estes, but Park Gables didn't want their connection blocked, so they did community activism. They talked to their alderman, they talked to the park board, they petitioned, and they said, no, we don't want this. You know, there may have also, it was the 20s, it was Chicago, there probably was also some remuneration involved to somebody or other. I'm not sure who, but yeah, it was public protest works still.
So somebody asked if the Gubbins and McDonnell homes are still there.
Oh yeah, those are pictures that I took when we had our house tour in that neighborhood a couple years ago.
And then somebody else asked if we know the apartment number of Blietz.
I don't. Tim might, but I don't. I don't know.
You know, it's not the number that matters. It's the top apartment in the middle. I mean, it's like the nicest apartment.
Yeah.
As you would expect for a Blietz apartment, but it's the one that overlooks the park. And it's really, it's the one with one of the apartments. If you go by the front of the building, you notice that some of the apartments have these huge chandeliers, and it's a chandelier department.
And the there are beams. There are wooden beams on the top of the apartment.
And it's a cathedral ceiling.
A cathedral ceiling. It's gorgeous.
So it's the one that's right sort of at the middle thing of the E.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an E, and so it's like right here.
Yeah. Okay.
And there are two of them there. And there are two on the, I think two on either side of the building too.
One, yeah, one on either side.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So this might be an owner question. Because it's about the tile in the bathroom. If you know what kind of tile it is, and could it be the same type of tile that's in the swimming pool?
No.
No. Nobody knows.
Okay,
we can shut down the conversation, Earl.
It's not the same tiles that are in the swimming pool, but I would say they may have been the Flint faience.
Okay, yeah, that's actually what I meant.
Yeah.
And
it's all mortar set. If anybody's ever tried to take them out, it's pretty near impossible.
No, and I'll tell you, when we first moved in, I tried to hire people to clean them for me, and they would not do it because the tiles are set. You know, they're like subway tiles. You know, so they're set very tight together, and they were concerned about the grout being exploded out. And so I sat on my butt and scrubbed each tile till I was dead for a long time.
Loretta, you fortunately didn't die.
I didn't die. No, that's true.
Oh dear.
Has anybody bought more than one unit and combined them?
No.
I don't know if anybody's combined them, but there are a number of people that have bought more than one unit. Right. And, there are a number of...
Well, Earl being one of them.
Earl being one of them. And there are a number of people whose families live in different parts of the building.
No, I didn't buy it. It's the family bought.
The family bought.
Families in.
And then somebody had an interesting comment about the community room. Was it always a shared space? And if it was, maybe that was the nursery.
I have no idea. It's just it is what it is now, and I don't know what its history was, but it's set up very much like an apartment. So it could have been originally an apartment.
There's a bathroom, there's a kitchen, there's a dining room, and a living room, but there's no bedroom space. So my guess is no.
So if anybody's curious why I didn't shoot that, it's because of COVID. It's locked up, and they told me that they would have to sanitize it after I left, and I thought, you know what, don't worry about it. It's just one room.
We're being very
Gorgeous
cautious.
room, though. It was just remodeled a few years ago. And
Somebody asked if there's a monthly fee to take care of, for example, cleaning the halls and repairs. Oh, and somebody else asked how many floors are in the building.
There's 3 floors, and the assessments that each unit does takes care of everything. Any repairs and any, it's an assessment like you would have a condo, right? So we take care of the pool, the roof, the grounds, any repairs, all of that goes into our assessment. Plus, our heating and our water and our taxes.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And Donna, do you know how it became a co-op again after it seemed to have lost much of its co-op power?
Yes, in the late 40s, after the war, there seems to have been, or I guess this was started during the war, there was a movement, this going from co-op to not co-op to back to co-op was something that happened in a lot of buildings around the city. And at that time, in the 40s, when things were a little more prosperous and stable, there was a group of people who were the owners then who co-opted and sold shares, just like you would convert a condominium today, I guess. Loretta's shaking her head, nodding, so I guess that's the right thing. But I'm trying to remember the name of the resident of Park Gables who was a partner in that enterprise, but it's not coming to me. But there was one man who seems to have managed to retain some amount of his ownership share through the whole Depression, who then had some other investors and they bought all the shares and then reallocated them to people as a co-op again. Happened a lot in other buildings too at that time around the city.
That makes sense. It's not, the Depression just didn't hit Park Gables.
Oh, the Depression.
Otherwise, I'm sure everyone would be moving. Somebody asks, is there a handyman that lives on the property? Is there somebody that can take care of?
Well, George Stoen, who is our property manager, is also one of our shareholders.
He's an owner.
So,
and he does live here.
Yeah.
And he's our backdoor neighbor. So that's convenient.
That would be the units to combine.
You bet.
Somebody wants to know why there's no pets allowed. Or maybe we should explain there's no pets allowed.
And there's no pets allowed because there's no pets allowed. It's always been, it's been that way for the 10 years that I've been here.
It's been a controversy, I think, over the years. Yeah, I mean, we had a kind of a vote on it, and it was turned down since we've been here in the last decade. So I think there's a lot of things to consider. A co-op is different than a condominium because everyone owns shares in the whole building, and so whatever happens to my personal unit is not necessarily always my issue, it's everyone's issue. So I think there's a part of that plays into it. I don't know.
Is your pool closed because of COVID?
Our pool did not close. We are limiting the use of the pool to one person or one family unit at a time.
Okay.
But the pool is open.
We sign up,
Yeah.
We have a sign-up
times.
sheet.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned that the building is really big. How many units are in it?
There are 72. What? Go ahead.
I'm not sure, either 71 or 72.
There were originally 72. I don't know if nobody's combined any, then
I think it's 72.
Yeah.
I have a question that says, how is co-op different than restrictive covenants?
Co-op is just a different way of incorporating, just like a condominium. A condominium, every person owns their unit, and then they share in the maintenance of the common areas. A co-op is where everyone buys a share into the entire building. So we don't own our unit. We own shares in the whole building. So it's just a different way of incorporating.
The restrictive covenants the only way you would restrictive covenants would have prevented sale of shares to certain kinds of people based on discriminatory practices.
Yeah.
These days, a co-op, I believe, still has screening. I know even our condo has screening, but you can't discriminate on the basis of race, religion, gender, identity, you know, any of those things that are federally prohibited by law under the Fair Housing Act.
The
But remember,
only
I don't
thing,
know if anybody remembers, I just saw a special on John Lennon in New York City. And I
he
think
was in a co-op.
he was in a co-op, and I think his co-op board originally tried to not let him in because of his drug history or fame or whatever, but they ended up reconsidering. But
They
that's,
probably didn't want the publicity.
yeah, probably not. Or a murder on their front gate. But that's
Madonna was denied living in a co-op in New York City.
probably for the same reason.
Madonna.
Oh,
I remember when Harry Belafonte could not get a co-op in New York. I'm from New York, as you could probably tell.
I can do.
And it was a very big shock when he couldn't get into a co-op that he wanted to be into. And there was who owned part of the building he couldn't get into.
And that would be against the law today, but it wasn't until 1964. Yeah.
I think the law actually says
It was a long
that
time
in-
ago.
Somebody wants to know if you allow comfort animals and/or service animals.
Under discussion.
Yes, no?
It's under discussion. There are certain bylaws that have to be gone over with that.
Yeah, you have to allow.
Well,
It's-
let your internal
It's an open issue right now.
go on that. Is somebody thinking about wanting to buy a condo here or buy a share in this property? I don't know. I want to point out, I just looked through the chat, we have some relatives of Mr. Gubbins and Mr. McDonnell on the line. So,
Oh, wow.
wherever you are, glad to have you with us. I think you're maybe not in Chicago, most people, most of you. Nancy, where are you? You're muted.
This is Pam Kerr. I'm Audrey McDonald's daughter and Alan and Virginia McDonald's granddaughter, and I'm currently living in Tucson, Arizona, but I still have a son in the Chicago area.
Fabulous, fabulous.
And I'm Nancy Gruber. I live currently 15 minutes from the Mississippi River in Iowa, and we have family still living in Lake County, Illinois.
Great. Well, we're so glad you could be with us. That's really cool. Love it. Love it. I think we have some other people from other places too, which has been really the great thing about this house tour, that we've been able to expand our audience way beyond the people who can actually go physically visit the houses. And I really, really have enjoyed that.
So Donna, that's it for the questions.
I had one that wasn't addressed. I put it in. Are there pools in all of the buildings? I've seen the one in the castle, the Park Castle, but I don't know if the others have pools.
I don't know. Does anybody know?
So she means in the development, and I don't think so. I don't think that the two that are south of Park Castle have a swimming pool.
Oh, okay, that's what I was wondering.
Probably not. Okay. We're way over time, so let's go back. I just want to fill people in on our coming events. This, of course, is the end of the virtual house tour, but links to all the episodes will be posted on our website, so you can go. It'll take us a little while to get today's up there, but some of them are already up there, and you can review the tour or share it with anybody else who missed it at any time. We do have some new things coming up. This week, actually, on Friday, Open House Chicago started its 10-day event, which is a virtual event this year, and it runs through next Sunday. On Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, I'm going to be, or 10 o'clock, I'm going to be doing a thing for Open House Chicago that is a sort of a discussion on researching your home's history. So if you're at all interested in the process of what we do to go through this research, you might want to tune into that. On October 28th, we're going to have what we're calling a member mingle conversation and happy hour, and we'll be getting stuff on the website about that soon. If you're a member or a volunteer, or you volunteered in the past, you'll be getting an invitation to that, and we hope you'll join us. It's a way to socialize and to talk and kind of think about the future of the organization. So that's what that's about. On November 17th, we're going to have our Living History program again, which is will be a Zoom, and it's a talk by Marcia Walker McWilliams, who is the executive director of the Black Metropolis Research Consortium in out of the University of Chicago. It's going to talk about how they are working to document and preserve Black history in Chicago. So that should be quite interesting. And then December 5th, we're doing a joint event with the Edgewater Historical Society. There's a man named John Lyons who lives in Rogers Park, is a historian, has written a book about the Beatles in Chicago. And part of the Beatles' trip to Chicago in 1965 brought them to Edgewater, to the Saddle and Cycle Club for some kind of party event. And that's just one of the things that John talks about in his book. So that should be kind of interesting, especially for Beatles fans. And then just to wrap up, a reminder, we can always use your support. These are the links to show support and to look at what we're doing. I really cannot thank you all enough for attending, making this house tour a resounding success when we thought it was just going to be a lost cause for this year. And I hope everybody stays healthy and stays involved in the society, and that we'll see you again soon.
And buy our cookbook.
And buy our cookbook. That's right. Earl and Katie worked on the cookbook, and there's a bunch of people from Park Gables who had recipes in there, and we love it. Buy our cookbook, and you can buy it at Clark Devon Hardware as well as on our website.
Really?
So, yeah.
I have 7 recipes in the cookbook.
Oh, that's right. Ellen does. Yeah. I mean, lots of people.
And check out the deviled eggs. They're the best. They're the world's best deviled eggs.
I see Harriet Russell. She's got about 5 or 6 recipes in that book, and Earl and Katie have a ton. And don't forget, Earl was a chef. Earl is Chef Earl. You want his recipes. So
yeah.
buy the recipes.
I didn't know that about you, Earl.
Oh.
Yes, he's Chef Earl.
Yeah.
Chef Earl.
I expect food now.
Well, it's not for sale. It's not for sale anymore. We lost our business license. We didn't renew it. So.
Oh dear.
But you can invite her over.
Well, thank you all again. I'm gonna call it a day on this because I.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Stay healthy.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Wonderful tours and really just wonderful.
Thank you very, very much for this introduction to this neighborhood. Thank you.
Signing off.
Thanks a lot.